United Nations declared May 3 each year as World Press Freedom Day, and the conceptualization of such an observance is steeped in the principles adopted by UNESCO, enshrined in its constitution. In fact, since its formation, UNESCO has placed freedom of expression and freedom of the media at the core of its mission. Its constitution, adopted in November 1945, in fact states that UNESCO member states will collaborate in the work of advancing the mutual knowledge and understanding of all peoples through all means of mass communication. And they should promote the free flow of ideas by word and image. UNESCO further follows the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, whose Article 19 stipulates that everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. With the Windhoek Declaration of 1991, UNESCO defined press freedom as covering media freedom, pluralism, and independence. In the years that followed, the importance of the safety of journalists and gender sensitivity have become integral to its conceptualization. Yesterday, May 3, the world observed International Press Freedom Day. Today, to discuss the issue, the subject matter here in Guyana, to take an international perspective on press freedom and to look at what's happening here in Guyana in the press landscape. We have with us Honorable Gail Teixeira, Presidential Advisor on Governance, and since you know media and governance are interrelated, the work of the media. We also have Editor-in-Chief of the Kaieteur News, Mr. Adam Harris, who is a veteran journalist extraordinaire. And of course we have Edward Layne, editor of the NCN Newsroom, who of course is one of the bright stars, I understand, of the media landscape of Guyana. Gentlemen, Madam Teixeira, thank you very much for joining us on this Sunday for a look at press freedom and how we can contextualize Guyana versus the region and the rest of the world. Let's first take a broad perspective of press freedom internationally. I see from UNESCO a report that indicates that for 2013, 65 journalists were killed in various parts of the world. 65 in 1 year. And so, Madam Teixeira, if you were to cast your net broadly at what's happening with regards to press freedom around the world, how do you see this? And how do you juxtapose what's happening out there with what's happening here in Guyana?
Well, I think that the figures for 2013 on press freedom, both by the Freedom House report, global report, and the World Report on press freedom, there are some very disturbing trends where we're seeing the decline in a number of countries in their status of either being free, falling in their ranking to be partially free, countries that were not free remaining not free. So clearly there's been a decline, and certainly the increased numbers of journalists who are killed in action, the number of journalists who are imprisoned is particularly disturbing, and we all know about, there are I think about 40-odd journalists imprisoned in Turkey. We have the journalist, the famous Al Jazeera 5 in Egypt, and you could go on in that phase. And then, of course, the worst news this morning is the execution or assassination of Layne Hall, who has been a journalist in one of the Trinidadian newspapers, but also in her own right as a lawyer and a well-respected lawyer and a woman lawyer. So that I think that we have to look at what is going on in the world and to recognize that the issue of safety of journalists is critical when they're doing their work. And I think UNESCO has come up with a plan of action to really deal with the UN bodies taking more seriously the protection of journalists, particularly in conflict zones and so forth. And also to where countries have made changes, and I'm proud to say that Guyana has gone up 13 points, gone up, not declined, but gone up 13 points in ranking. We're still considered free, partially free, but in the sense that Guyana has improved its status is something I'm proud of as a Guyanese. So I think just in terms of a quick capitulation of that.
Adam?
Well, in Guyana, I don't think we ever had a problem with press freedom. Of course, press freedom is how it varies from country to country. We have the universal concept where we're free to express our views. We are allowed to, importation of newsprint and all of that is readily done without hindrance. Our big problem, however, is our ability to recognize how free we really are, because sometimes freedoms can be abused. And in some cases, we have abused freedoms by distorting statements from people. We have abused freedoms by refusing to respect some of the people we interview. We have also abused freedoms sometimes by actually denying to report some of the things that would have been said by other people. Having said that, however, the fact that we have 4 sections of the print media, myriad television stations, internet, radio, all operating, I'd say we're very comfortable with our aspect of the press freedom.
Edward, you have done a comparative analysis, I understand, of the rankings for 2014. Reporters Without Borders have put out their rankings. Guyana has moved up. A number of countries that were ranked very high have slipped. And I think we stand very well with regards to those rankings.
Certainly, Dario. I looked at 6 of the top countries, so to speak. The United States, Brazil, the UK, Canada, India, and of course I included Guyana in that list. And when you look at it, right, the United States, for example, went down 13 places. So it therefore means the freedom of the press in a country like the United States dropped significantly. You had Brazil drop 2 places. You had the UK also drop 3 places. India moved up 2. India moved up 1, Canada 2, and Guyana moved up 3 places.
Yeah, I made a mistake. I said
3
13.
places. So
it's the US that dropped 13, not Guyana going up 13.
It goes to show the progress that we're making locally. And I must agree with Adam that our situation in this part of the world, not only Guyana, but this part of the world is totally different. The media is much freer. And sometimes it boggles my mind when you hear we are partly free. And when you compare us to what is happening in some of the countries that are declared where the press is free. So I think Guyana is making progress over the years. If we look at a number of reports coming out, we had our own local monitoring during the elections, the 2006 elections, for example. And when you look at that report, you see how open the press was to political parties and so forth. So I think our situation in this part of the world, it's only tainted by what happened yesterday, this morning with Layne in terms of a journalist being killed.
So close to home.
So close to home. So I think our situation overall is improving.
And the 2 places that we've moved up, what do you think may have contributed within the past year to us getting a better ranking of 2 spots?
Well, there are some things that matter. For example, our labor laws aren't being applied as often as they used to. And that was one of the means used in many third world countries to stifle the media. They say something, you sue. There haven't been many libel suits around. That could have been one of the reasons. I think another reason also had to do with the fact that we were allowed to access information even a bit more than we did in the past. So that also would have been taken into consideration.
And since you mentioned the libel laws, maybe it probably had something to do with the fact that Madam Teixeira and the Honorable Attorney General, I think, gave positive responses when the International Press Institute visited last year and made a case for the criminal defamation laws
decriminalization,
in Guyana
not
to
to
be
remove
repealed.
libel laws,
Right.
not to remove libel
But to
laws, decriminalize
decriminalize
it as a
uh-huh.
criminal offense and make it a civil offense. And we said we would consider that. Of course, the agenda in Parliament has been extraordinarily challenging, so we haven't got to that. But just to add to what Adam said, the two pieces of legislation that were passed that I think that would have improved our standing, the Access to Information Act with the appointment of a commissioner, which allows for people to access information that's not publicly available, the improvement in our websites and the posting of public information, and we're all hoping that the Parliament website after 5 years or 4 years can finally get set up, because there is an enormous amount of information that could be posted there. They're publicly available with hard copies, but you've got to get them. And then, of course, the Broadcasting Act, with the setting up of the National Broadcasting Authority, to allow for all the what were said to be pending applications for TV and radio licenses, and that now is proceeding, so that again they're opening up more and in a regulatory framework. So I think those are some of the things that would have contributed. The point that Adam made earlier about abuse, I think that governance structures are important, and even when we had the bipartisan committee with Derek Bernard and myself, and we did the broadcasting policy and consulted all the broadcasters and so on. One of the issues, and we borrowed from the Canadian laws and Trinidad laws and stuff like that, was that the agency had to also be self-regulating. So in the broadcasting group, there had to be self-regulation, what hours you put on. So we didn't put into the act that there should be a council of broadcasters who must do the following. We said on their own volition they should do that, to regulate what hours violent movies are shown or pornography or stuff like that. And the second thing was that, and in the media code of conduct was also seen as a self-regulatory mechanism, that the right to reply, that the journalists should investigate thoroughly their stories and stuff like that, and to make sure that they were balanced. These are things that we still grapple with, because we have to recognize all over the world that media, you have the professional ethics of journalists, but you also have editors and owners of newspapers, for example, owners of television, that set the tone. I mean, when you look at the Murdoch case in the UK, the journalists who did what they did, I don't think have been found to be at fault. It is the owners and the policy that allowed for that. I'm sure that the journalists in Guyana, particularly maybe even my friend Adam, that write certain things that the bosses say, no, that's not going through. That's the problem of every journalist in the world, in every country of the world, that ultimately someone makes the decision to cut, to edit what you've done. But I think the abuses, I mean, more recently during the budget debate, there was a case of a child that hung himself, was it? Yes. And iNews put on the photograph of the child hanging, and we were furious, we were livid. This had nothing to do with whether it was a agency that's for or against government. This was unacceptable, and in all the children's laws and in the legislation surrounding media and the media code, this was not allowed. Just unacceptable. And so I think we've got to that issue of recognizing the boundaries. Even though there's freedom, there must be boundaries of what is acceptable behavior. Attacking people's wives or children is not acceptable for those of us who are public officials. Attack me. I'm a public official. I am accountable for what I do. Don't bring people who are innocent into it. This is not allowed.
Actually wanted to bring up the issue of regulation later on in the discussion, because I wanted us to have a look at the Leveson report. It's interesting that you brought it up.
Report?
The Leveson report from the UK with the Murdoch scandal, which made a very, very strong case in its recommendation for a regulatory body.
Yeah.
Because it sort of debunked the whole notion that self-regulation is the acceptable norm in the 21st century.
Yeah.
Last year when we had this media discussion, I believe Adam was here, we had the editor of Cyber News, who insisted that self-regulation was the way that they wished to go. It has worked, and it should remain that way. In the Leveson report, we've seen a case where they have, case by case, point by point, debunked the freedom that is enjoyed under self-regulation, with no authority being able to pin down the media to being responsible and being held accountable. The media should not necessarily be holding itself accountable, the report states. But we're going to get into it a little further. I wanted to look at the themes of this year's observance. They've looked at 3 themes, so important this year that one theme was not sufficient. They're looking at media's importance in development. They also want the world to look at the safety of journalists and the rule of law. And of course, the other one is sustainability and integrity of journalism as a profession. Let's take the first one, media's importance in development, and within the Guyana context. Let's talk about the media's role in development. The media here, over the past few years, have sort of split itself into for and against development, it would seem. We can debate whether that is in fact the case. The state media promulgates the views and programs and policies of the government. Every project, every initiative sort of gives those initiatives and programs full airplay, goes into details to sort of expound on the benefits to the people, the trickle-down effect, and all of that. On the other hand, we're seeing a situation where some of the private media houses seem bent on almost appearing to be anti-development. They would argue that it's not, but in terms of appearance, we wonder. Every new project that is announced, they tear it apart, under the argument that they are holding the government accountable. So accountability as a responsibility of the media is enshrined. I don't think we can run from that, Madam Teixeira, as in accountability and governance. The two are closely interrelated. The press sees its role as the watchdog of the government. But where must that line be drawn between appearing to be anti-development as against holding government accountable?
I'm not sure that media's role, Adam, is only to do with the government being accountable. I think media is, journalism, because I think there are distinctions between when we say media and journalism. But the media is there as they say, the fourth estate, to observe, to watch, to write about, to inform, to analyze, to criticize. And therefore it is not seen only as a critic of, say, a government, but also civil society, private sector, the labor. They're expected to have that broad sweep. And because they hold themselves to this higher standard of being not a proponent of any particular view, but the observer, the reporter, the chronicler, almost a historian, because much of history now is written based on press reports, the living historian, that their standard requires much greater responsibility on their part. And so the issue of whether they cover a story and how well they cover the story. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of what comes out now is, are you for the government or against the government? And I think who loses in the end is the people, in terms of they're not being given the full scope of the information that's available. The government obviously uses, and it hurts the image of the press, and most importantly, it hurts the image of the country. because now with social media, you can get Kaieteur news or Stavrik news on Guyana Chronicle, whatever, on the net. And so what is being broadcast out there is an image of a country that's really, really bad, and it doesn't help us in attracting investment. So the issue of journalism and development is a critical issue. I mean, when you look at some of the newspapers in the region, I think it is Barbados, you look at some of the newspapers, all the crime issues are way down in the newspapers, like page 10, 17 and stuff, because their economy depends on tourism. If they keep putting out that they have a big crime problem, which they don't, but it is increasing, it'll scare away their tourists. The economy depends on that. So these are decisions that editors make, that owners of the media make, because ultimately going to cut their throat. And so I think that kind of balance is not here. It is not here, and we have to find a balance of a highly qualified, the old journalist, some of the older journalists like Adam, I don't mean that as an insult in terms of length of time you've been around as I have, we've grown up together, is that the standard has to be set in terms of how do you put over a story. We've come out of a period of lack of democracy where the press, Mirror and Catholic Standard in those days, later on Stavrik News, had to scrounge for paper and had to walk between the raindrops on what could be said and stuff like that, but nevertheless to give people information. And we've come into a period where the press is open and basically unregulated. And how does one balance that? So there's the attack on the government NCN and even the attack on Gina, and there's a Chronicle. That's basically it. But you have 20 odd TV stations, radio stations, newspapers, and of course the one we haven't talked about, and I think we need to talk about later in the program, is the social media, which is totally unregulated. And that's a big issue at the international level and in Guyana. So I think that we've come through a lot of things, but the media has a responsibility to be balanced. And when it comes to development, they have to make shrewd decisions on whether, from a nationalist point of view, it's not to say that you're asking them to sweep things under the carpet, but you're asking them that when you have raging headlines, that you're hurting the country. You may have enough influence to change the government eventually, when that may be the intention, but the impact on the country and the impact on development cannot be replaced. And that is, I think, one of the issues that the media owners, as distinct from the journalists, to me, have to make those distinctions.
Adam, that line has become blurred.
I am not so sure. You see, what happens is the focus that individual media houses would have on developmental projects. If there is a project, every media house would zero in on it. Where the problem comes is when you start to examine, one, the benefit of the project, for example. And sometimes you ask questions and you don't get the kind of answers you need. Case in point, the Amila Falls project, which I think is important to the Guyana's development. We really need hydro. And when that project was introduced, we reported on it, and there was a certain figure. And then the figure kept rising, and we started to ask questions. Now, some people would see the questioning as being anti-development. No, it wasn't. It was just saying to us, look, you told me this project was going to cost, let's say, $500. Now, we haven't even added a nail to it. It's now $700. Why? Another project, for example, would have been the Marriott Hotel project. Of course we need a Marriott. Beautiful hotel, people are going to come. You need it. The problem is, what happens to the so-called hotel rooms that we have? It is said that we don't have enough hotel rooms, yet when you look at the hotels, occupancy level is way down, and you start to ask questions. Is it wise to build a Marriott, or should we have done something else with that money? And the debate goes on. And trust me, the reporters would start to ask the question, but then the public gets involved. The public starts to write letters. There are press conferences by special interest groups, for example, the tourism and hospitality people who would already have had hotels. And whatever they say is reported, so you get the impression that the Marriott is under attack. It isn't really. You're looking at different aspects of the same program.
But there's another impression that one gets, particularly when you look at some of the projects that the Kaieteur News zeroes in on. That impression seemed to suggest that the Kaieteur News is at war with former President Jacques Diop, that the Kaieteur News is at war with all initiatives introduced by President Jacques Diop.
No. First of all, let's look at how Kaieteur would report on the LCDS. The distribution of these solar panels, that's a big thing. It helps out in the various communities. Nobody can question that. What are some of the other programs that President Jacques Diop would have initiated? The Skeldon project? Okay, Skeldon never performed to the maximum. When we spent a lot of money, it was the largest investment. So you look at that and you say, for the love of God, couldn't we have done something better with $200 million? And sugar production went down.
Yeah, but to cut you, Adam, the problem with that, if that was what Kaieteur News was doing, for example, it wouldn't be so offensive. What Kaieteur News tends to say is that the reason why these haven't worked is someone's got money in their pocket. And so a lot of it is saying there's corruption. This thing took place, the figures went up because someone is benefiting from this. The problem, I think, for Kaieteur News and some of the newspapers, you all got the same experts you're asking. And all your experts or opinion makers are tainted. You have a limited number of experts. I don't have a problem with newspapers saying, look, this hydro thing, why is it figure? Let's get an expert to give us the analytical, because not every journalist has that kind of financial, economic expertise. People in a lot of newspapers, you have experts who write on finance and economy, others on law and stuff like that. So you have to get someone who does it. And unfortunately, the same expert who's inviting Kaieteur, who's not a finance expert, by the way, is the same expert advising Starbuck News, advising whoever else. So that you're regurgitating the same problem. And then worse than that is that the media now is directing the political parties. And I want to expand on that. Generally, political parties push the media. Who owns it, special interests, and stuff like that. In Guyana, and I'll tell you from my own experience, I sit in parliamentary meetings, and I'll have politicians on the opposite side, and in meetings of the president with the opposition parties, and they will quote from Kaieteur News, as if that is their source of information. So it appears as if Kaieteur News, inadvertently or advertently, is setting the political agenda of the political parties. So when certain politicians in the opposition say, but Kaieteur News said this on Marriott, Kaieteur News said this on Amila, I'm saying, but you have been given volumes of stuff by the government on Amila. What are your experts saying? Put aside Kaieteur. Maybe there's a convergence of opinions. But how is it that we've given you these binders that you couldn't even fetch out of office of the president? You had to get help to fetch out all the documents on Amila on 2 occasions. And yet it's all reduced to some headline of a few days ago of Kaieteur News. So this may not be a problem with the media, it may be a problem with the political parties. But it seems as if the media is setting the agenda for what are the issues a political party raise. So Kaieteur is saying, look, we have questions about this and questions about that. But the issue is that it comes down to every time somebody putting money in their pocket. And that's where the danger comes, because you have no proof of that.
Those insinuations aside, Madam Teixeira, to what extent does the government find useful what Kaieteur News seems to believe it's doing? Exposing loopholes in projects, shortcomings in this or that. Does the government actively look at some of these reports to see how it can better things?
I would say that there are times when Kaieteur News, for example, puts out an expose that we're not aware of, and we investigate, and they found there's some truth in it. I wouldn't pan everything that they do. However, the problem is that sometimes the reply part isn't there. The right to say, okay, government, what did you do about this? Or that the issue of having done something about it, the story doesn't end. It continues to be regurgitated, you know, like you say, a jarre, that was it, a gote the story. Whole time, you're goteing it all the time, even though the story done, finish, let's move on.
Even though you may have had an
You've done
intervention
something,
from
you've
government.
addressed it, yes, it's true, thank you very much, let's move on. There's another issue. So the media plays a role, not just Kaieteur, the media plays a role sometimes in exposing where there are all sorts of things going on that could be fixed. That's an important role in terms of development, in terms of improvement, in terms of governance. But it is more the way in which the media and certain media houses carry their stories in such a way as it appears to be accusatory, it's confrontational, and therefore it creates an environment in the society that this is not about improving Guyana. This is about just exposing for exposing's sake, find everything wrong where there is wrong or where you think there's wrong, and nothing is good in this country. And I think that is the danger.
Edward has been wanting to contribute.
Listening to what Adam would have said in terms, I don't think there's a problem with the availability of information. The problem is, sometimes when this information becomes available for any of the project that you mentioned and you talked about cost rising and so forth, and I think Mrs. Teixeira point directly to what the problem is. The journalist gets all this information. Sometimes it's either, and we have to recognize this, it's either laziness to go through that information and get the real facts in there, or because of a agenda by possibly the owner of that particular media house or so. So you have the information, but you don't want to put out the information, and you made the point earlier about the press being so free that sometimes we tend to distort things. You have the information, but you don't utilize the information. We forget the basic principles of journalism, which has to do with honesty, accuracy, independence, and so forth. Sometimes you have cases where you write the story in a particular way, which brings out the true information, but because of this agenda, whoever agenda it is, you tend to twist things around. So it's not an issue of asking the questions, Adam, and not getting the answers. So sometimes when you get the answers, it boils down to selling the paper. Often it boils down to that. Selling the paper. If I put the story and I have too many developmental stories that will look as though I'm a mouthpiece of the government, then people will not buy the paper.
So on the issue of media and development, clearly there isn't enough development support communication taking place in the private media, and there's a whole lot of it taking place in the state media. Why couldn't there be a convergence, as Madam Teixeira said, in the national interest? So that some main issues that are of import to the national interest are given development support communication in the private media as well.
Easy.
But that all brings up the argument of who's doing propaganda and who's not. They look at some of the stories you're doing because you're in support or you're bringing out the facts of development.
But what is propaganda? Propaganda is propagating a message. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong.
I mean, it's not as if the government is saying one thing in the state media and the private media isn't saying. More often than not, ministers of the government are comfortable to talk with the state media, and that is where Gina would come in. Many times he would call and he would ask for interviews, and they would say, look, I will send the information through Gina. If they talk to us, we'd be able to ask questions and get to the bottom of stories. I mean, I can rattle off.
Really? Is that true, Edward? I mean, when I was a practicing journalist, I had hell to get ministers to respond and give information when I worked with NCN. But the same ministers were calling the private media and sharing information.
Sometimes we are surprised when we see a story, sometimes in the private media, and we ask, but how this minister didn't
How didn't the state media
Gina
get
would
that?
call us sometimes and ask us the same question. We haven't heard about this.
All right.
So,
but that's at the personal level. The minister might
No,
be
but that's not
friendly.
what you said just now.
No, I'm telling you. But
That's not
more
what you
often
said
than
just
not,
now.
no, many times we make requests, and they would say, all right, classic case, Minister Berry Ramsaran. He talks to the state media before he talks with us. Robeson Ben would talk with me because we have a relationship, and as a result, he would talk with some of the other reporters. But he too would prefer to talk to the state media. Prime Minister Sam Hines, whenever we approach him for an interview, he would always say, let me get some other media houses when I talk to you. He called the state media houses. And that's how it goes. Very, very...
Which is probably the wise thing to do.
Well, it might be the wise
They
thing.
all get the same information at the same
What might
time.
come out eventually?
Well, that might be so, but that's the thing. The ministers, they prefer to talk with the state media generally.
But what I got from what you were saying, Edward, is it comes down to maybe our freedoms being a little too free. And I asked that because I want to drill down on some of the infringements. And forgive me, Adam, and I'm not singling out Kaieteur News, but you are the editor who's here, and I wanted to refer to a case in point that I thought may go down, at least in my books, as the infringement of the century with regards to media in Guyana. The Kaieteur News on March 10, 2014, in the Demboise. By the way, are you the author of Demboise? Mm-hmm. You're the author?
I'm the author.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
No,
but
Who's the back?
no. But this case that I want to refer to, it rose the hairs on my skin when I look at the training that I've had in journalism. March 10. Them boys said, Jagdio must left in a tree. It says the world mourning how 239 people who been on a jet from Malaysia to Beijing and how them dead. Seem very insensitive there to such an important sad issue in terms of how it was structured. Well, the plane disappeared, and now the whole world hearing that terrorists blew up the plane. It's not a private jet like the one Jagdio fly to Miami. But it went on to say further that Jagdio himself know about terrorism because he used to terrorize people and get rid of who he couldn't terrorize. It went on to say that a particular man, didn't state the name of the man, that Jagdio did want the man dead. He failed, but he's still planning. This is an assertion that the former president is planning a murder. The same Jagdio now studying if he go up on a plane and terrorists blow up the plane. Of course, one man, I don't know if it's the same man who they said the Jagdio wants dead. At least one man wished that it could happen. But Jagdio mustn't dead. He must live to punish the next jet he hire. When something happened to he, and he used taxpayers' money, he must left in a tree for a month, somewhere in the jungle. May seem very funny to some people and so on.
I think it's
but
absolutely gross.
we're talking about a
and
former
vulgar.
president to begin with.
I can't believe you wrote that.
It made a reference to an issue that has gripped the world in mourning, in disbelief, in wonder as to what happened to that plane from Malaysia to Beijing. But seem to connect the disappearance of that plane with Jagdio going on a plane and
There was no connection.
I don't need to repeat
There was
what
no
some of what.
connection.
But let's
No.
divorce it.
It's
Let's
not there,
divorce
but-
it, Adam.
They had a couple of things.
Let's divorce it before you go. Let's divorce the Malaysian, the experience of the Malaysian plane. Let's deal with the issue of this assertion that the former president is planning a murder. Let's deal with the issue that if he goes on a plane again, he should.
Okay, we
should
can deal
crash
with
and
all of
leave in
that.
a-
And I wouldn't even want to zoom in on the particular
Let's- let's
inferences,
do those- no,
but
we
to,
can
to,
deal with
let's
that.
look at it.
Journalists being
Let's
responsible.
deal with
Let's
that.
look at
deal
it
with that.
in the framework of responsibility, of freedoms, and the expression of that
Let's deal-
freedom.
Yeah, let's deal with all those things. Now, first of all, Dembai says a satirical piece. More often than not, the truth is stretched or embellished.
But that's
Dembai
not
said
really
it
satire.
isn't regular.
Yeah, it's not
That
real
doesn't sound like satire
That's
to
not
me.
really
This particular
satire.
one.
No, it isn't
It's-
regular thing. That's one. When President Jagdio, Guyana Times, NCN said that Glenlal was a snitch. I mean, we all know the behavior of the drug lords in
But
this
correction. NCN didn't say Glenlal was a snitch. NCN was quoting what someone said.
That he spoke, what the report
So
said.
there's a difference.
No, hold on.
You're
What
saying
the
NCN
report
is saying
said,
it.
yeah, what the report, I remember the hell this boy name was disappeared now. The one who escaped with the files out of the US place and started out WikiLeaks.
Snowden. Oh, WikiLeaks.
Oh.
Yeah.
Snowden you're talking about.
When that reporting, it said yes, Glenn spoke with embassy officials and all of that. And he had his finger on the pulse of the underworld or something like that. But he didn't say he was a snitch. You know, a snitch is one who carries news to whoever you can think about.
But let's
It did quote
No.
communication with Glenn Lal and
let's
the US.
let's
No, he-
frame
anybody-
Carried information.
Anybody? No.
let's
you
let's
talking
frame
to
this
us about a lot
article,
of things.
however.
I was
We
doing that.
don't let's
I
we
was
don't
doing
need
that.
Yeah, but in
to.
other words, that you're now saying that what the accusation of Glenn Lal therefore is tit for tat. Is that what you're saying?
No, but it's
Jack-
evident.
no.
That is
Yes,
why.
sir.
That's why I
It's
premised
evident.
this subject matter, if you recall, by asking the question whether, based on what it appears to be, whether there was any fact in that appearance that Kaieteur News is at war with former President
I don't
Jacques
know
Diop,
about the war.
or what he's doing.
I don't know about the
And this
war.
this
I don't
particular
know about it.
article would seem
That
to.
was, yeah, I mean, let's face facts. Glenn Lal is the owner of the paper. President Jacques Diop, on many occasions, including many columns, not even one, a whole lot of columns in Guyana Times, and the Times also added satirical pieces. And you see these insinuations and all of that. You see them there. You see reports of Glenn Lal with pumpkin, with cocaine and pumpkin and all of that. Obviously, there would be some retaliation.
But
not in the
Adam
newspapers.
saying that Jacques Diop wanted the man dead. He failed, but he's still planning. That's not satire.
Oh, no. But by saying this man is a snitch, what you're doing is telling the underworld, hey, Glenn Lal talking to the US about us. Let's get rid of him. And there is no easier way to kill a man than to rile the drug world. I really don't want to go there.
But Adam, how do we contextualize this particular article on the press freedom?
On the press freedom, well, we were free to write it. But let me tell you something.
It's
Sometimes
free to publish it, not free to write
free
it.
to
You
publish.
Publish it.
Let me tell you something. You would find satirical pieces that you would not be comfortable with because they deal with issues that are sometimes at the core of a situation. I mean, not everything is a joke. More recently, for example, we had cause to look at the Marriott. We sat at a press conference here, Winston Brassington, I think it was in October, said, look, by the end of this year, we would know who's putting in the 8 million US and all of that. We're in May. 7 months later, we hear nothing about money going back to the Marriott. We know that NISIL put in $20 million, but work is still going on feverishly. I mean, by now the $20 million for $58 million construction would have been run out. But money is there to do the work. Where it coming from?
Well, arguably, Adam, if an official made a commitment to provide information and months down the road it's not forthcoming, then the media has a right to keep
Thank you
clamoring
very much. And you
for
would
the
shame
information.
them by saying that.
But
You
I
would
want
shame
to
them by
comment
saying
in
that.
terms
Well, I
of
don't
the
read their voice
practice.
at all because I think it's out of order.
In terms of the practice
And
of
therefore I don't even read it.
responsibility that comes with press freedom.
I don't. I
You
don't
should.
read it
You
because
should.
I think it's out of its bounds, and I think I'm not interested in those stories. I'm interested in good journalism.
Do we accept
go
that
there-
press freedom must come with responsibility
There
as
are,
well?
yeah, of course you have responsibility.
but
You
freedom,
do
you're
have
right.
responsibilities.
There is responsibility.
Is there any responsibility in an article like this?
Look. I
Don't
mean,
defend
what-
yourself as you're the
I
author,
can,
you know.
I can, no, I don't
No,
have
don't
to.
defend yourself, you're
no,
the
I
author.
can do it. I can do
Now,
it.
if libel laws were being exercised, you would get liable for that.
And we're wrong with it with the swimming
You're saying the former president is planning to kill
I
somebody.
didn't say he planning to kill nobody.
You did.
As
Read it.
what I said was that when he announced that Glenn Lala's a snitch, he's setting up the man there.
It didn't say that here. It says he want the man dead.
Yeah,
he
you want him
failed,
dead.
but he's still planning.
Well, he planning.
He planning.
He must come up with other thing, and that's because of
But
some
that's
of the
you
comments.
want the man dead. So
Well,
you're planning.
read the Guyana Times. Read these columns in Guyana Times. Look, I can tell you, we talk about responsible
No,
journalism.
but do you really believe, just let me ask you, do you really believe that by writing that, if your reason for writing it is that the comment on the snitch puts particular owner in jeopardy, his life in jeopardy, therefore, the way to satisfy the drug guys by not harming him because he's accused of a snitch is now to accuse the former president and let him stay up, let his plane crash and leave in a
No,
tree?
yes, I
I
crash.
don't-
It thank
you
God for
know.
crash.
Well,
Somebody
end up in a
can
tree.
winch it up and lower it in the tree.
Yeah,
You can say
right.
that. No, but
But I mean,
seriously,
it doesn't make sense. So this is supposed to be a ploy to the drug guys who the former, the owner is afraid of, to tell them, look, to be quiet. You're no longer. The man is no longer a snitch. That doesn't make sense to me.
You said no longer a snitch. You suggest that he was a snitch.
Well, I mean, that's what you're saying is that.
You know, I would have
I don't know.
thought. I would have thought, based on some of the attacks that we're seeing, that seem to be almost personal from some of the private media,
talking about the damn boy-
particularly
the
Kaieteur.
damn boy- the
No,
damn boy
generally against President Jardio and his initiatives.
No, you wouldn't see that in the
I'm gonna
newspapers.
move off from
You
this.
wouldn't see that in the newspaper.
I'm going to move off from this. I don't want to be labor focused on the former president. But I tried to analyze the personal attacks vis-a-vis everything else that exists in the media. And I thought that maybe where those attacks were coming from was a retaliation from the former president's characterization of the media during the last presidential campaign.
At vultures and all
Right?
that.
I thought it had something to do with
No.
that. But then when you see articles like this,
Yes,
and you don't see the other private media, I've never seen an article in Starbrook News or any other private media that attacks the former president personally
That's
in
the former
such a
president.
vulgar manner.
But have you seen articles attacking others? Guyana Times said I'm a homosexual. In no fancy language.
And then go to court and defend it.
What the hell am I going to do? I am not going to sue anybody. I mean, if they want to
You're
say it.
confident in your manhood. You
Exactly.
Don't,
I always say that. There are many things. You just read some of them. Read some of them.
but-
So, I mean, perhaps you don't read the Times, and I don't blame you. So you would see Kaieteur News.
The
But
last time we
trust
were
me,
here, we looked at the two and we pointed out that it was clearly a personal war
Well, there
between
you
the
go.
owner of the Times and Kaieteur
There
News.
you go.
All right. But let's move on to one of the other subject matter themes that UNESCO has asked for us to look at for this year's observance. It talked about the safety. We started the discussion by pointing out to that tragic news that we woke up to this morning in Trinidad, the assassination of a prominent journalist. We're talking about the safety of journalists and the rule of law within each society that guarantees that safety. In the Guyana context, over the years, I mean, in my years of journalism, whenever there's reference to the safety of journalists, I think of Father Dark. Nothing else comes to mind. But since then, journalists have been allowed to practice freely, and you hear of some police harassment from time to time. But you have situations where journalists are threatened and attacked here.
We have, at least I can speak for us at NCN. We have had, I think it was the 2006 elections, where Janelle Prasad, who was with NCN at that time, was attacked in Linden. Remember that story? She was hit in Linden. We had, when there was the Luzignan massacre and the protest on the road, one of our cameramen, Eric Collymore, was attacked. We had the 2011 elections in Camerville, where one of our cameramen again was attacked, was punched.
Were those
by an
attacks?
opposition activist.
Were those attacks within a crowd setting, or were they agitated attacks from leaders?
Well, crowd setting, but clearly you could identify with those who would have carried out those attacks, because you've had cases where people in the crowd say to them, but they're doing their job, leave them.
Yeah.
And they said, no, he's from NCN.
Yeah.
Well, having
Let's
raised,
beat him up and that kind of thing.
having raised that,
Those
and
cases.
Adam, I want you
I
to chip in
personally,
here.
and before you go on, I personally, during the Linden situation, the incident in Linden, I personally came under attack when the president was preparing to go up to Layne and we were up there. We had to stay back from the crowd because you know what? The Kaieteur News, the Starbrook News, the Prime News, the private media houses, quote unquote, the independent media houses, were allowed to go up and get what they want. When you hear NCN, we had to stay back because we were told, let me beat them here and that kind of
Alright,
thing. So
alright.
here those things happen.
But that's
Is
another
that
aspect.
situation, is that particular situation being aggravated on a daily basis by the positions being taken by the opposition parties in parliament to deny NCN funding and to characterize NCN in the ways that they do when they
It
make
is,
the
it is.
argument
It's
that
not
they
just
should not be
about denying
funded?
funding.
Are they
It's not just about
aggravating?
denying
I
funding.
will make that quantum leap.
There's
But
some
let
of
me
the
tell you,
comments that
let
you
me
hear
tell
from,
you.
from some of the
People
politicians.
view certain media houses based on what they read of issues that they seem to know different. The whole question how media houses put a spin on things. People react to that. Eddie talks about being attacked. I have been around since Noah was wearing short pants. And a lot of people know me. But I have been with reporters who people attacked. I'd say, hey, what happened to you? Relax. Say them, all right, they're with Uncle Adam Leffy. The kind of thing. So we have been attacked. And it ain't limited to NCN and all of that. Different people have been attacked on different occasions and all of this. Agricola. When the police shot the boy, one man sent a message that if he sees me in Agricola, what he ain't gonna do with me. Cool. I've been back in Agricola. But that was his view. We've all been threatened. We've all
But
been threatened.
like
But
national
the
sub.
issue is, but sorry, just to cut you, the issue of safety of journalists is regardless of which newspaper or entity they represent. It is a principle and an important thing that has to be protected by
I
everybody.
agree with you.
And therefore, whether NCN report is attacked or Adam is threatened with Agricola, it must be the business of the Press Association. It must be the business
That's
of
a
the
whole
media
different issue to
operators.
deal with.
It must be the business. So that when Janelle was attacked and other people, the Press Association said nothing as far as I remember. I could be wrong. The Press Association itself seems to abrogate itself not a fair hand. The Press Association represents all media persons. Photographers, videographers, the media guys who write the stories, everybody who is in the press body, the press. But they seem to be rather, discriminatory in who they defend and who they don't. So when there's an issue of Freddie Kissoon, it gets blown up, and next thing you know, overseas, or CN Sharma, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights is writing us, could you please answer on what happened to Mr. Sharma or Mr. Kissoon? But when journalists from other things are faced with crowds being hostile, equipment being damaged, threats to their lives, somehow this doesn't get anywhere. And I think that issue of governance can't be, because to me, if it is that we're all supposed to be this fourth estate and we are the eyes of the world and we're supposed to be fair, then it means we have to be fair. We can't pick and choose. The Press Association has said not a word about NCN budget being cut, as far as I know.
No.
I'm not saying this is a way
But-
of denying, wait, because NCN money is not all from the government. NCN makes money.
Right?
It makes money. The government has been traditionally putting in money for NCN for expansion of their infrastructure. More towers, more this, more transmission. And why? Because it is the government's responsibility to make sure that the Guyanese people have access to information. As a government responsibility, not just media. So these newspapers may or may not get them in the far interior. It is our responsibility as government that our people have access to information. And as other stations expand and they put up more antennas, they have more transmission, fine. So NCN doesn't depend on all the money from the government. So this whole thing is perpetuated that this is a taxpayer's thing and stuff. NCN makes money. It gets a certain amount of funding from the government, which is a lot of it for physical physical expansion, technological and physical expansion.
But Madam Teixeira,
But why would the Press Association? Look, you got all these young journalists. Look at these
I
young
agree.
people. They're young. They're not all like you and I. Why would the Press Association not say
I am
these
sure
are
they-
young budding
I'm
journalists
sure
coming
they
up?
would be represented.
No,
But
no,
by
no,
whom?
but
By the Press
Adam,
Association.
no, my dear,
I am
but
sure
You know what was
Adam,
the comment last
but
year
Adam,
about the Gina?
this is now what is today, May the 4th, right? The press is this was cut in April. The cut on the opposite press, I think, was May 14th or 15th. Not a peep.
Yeah.
Not a peep.
But you know
No,
what
no,
was
no.
the statement about Gina last year, for example?
And Gina is a completely different story.
When-
Gina
when-
is, as you know, as an old one from the
Information,
old
misinformation,
regime,
yeah.
is that the government information services was evolved into the Guyana publication and communication, which Enrico and all of them guys were involved in. Then we came into government and reversed it back to the GIS, and then it became GINA, Gina. Gina is specifically as the USIS,
Yes.
the British have their UKIS and whatever, Canada. It is specifically to government. This is not the prerogative of anybody else.
Yeah.
Solely the government of
But
the
there
day.
is something
Look,
that
the operators in Gina. The operators in Gina. Because they too provide stories that are
So
carried
that
in
one
the
is a
newspapers.
taxpayer.
We appreciate that.
That is a
Right?
taxpayer.
No, but the issue is, last year, for example, when the Press Association was approached about the cuts to Gina and NCN, it was clearly said that Gina, they're not journalists. They're not part of the press.
Well-
so we are not going to represent them.
We have just
the
5
other-
minutes to wrap up.
The
so-
other argument we heard about NCN is, oh, y'all making money.
Yeah.
And that was the end
But
of
I
it.
want to make a quick point. You know, Madam Teixeira talked about disseminating information.
Yeah.
I remember Prime News actually recording information and sending to Linden, sending to Kokwani, and the government saying, hey, y'all can't show them things on our station. We were disseminating information too. But you were quite selective on what you wanted to disseminate.
I
and
say
that
you, I'm
is-
not the charge of NCN.
No, I appreciate. No.
But you know too, I could send you. The Kaieteur News never interviews me, by the way, and
Well,
there's a
that's not-
reason why.
I-
No. If I'm acting or at HPS's press briefing, I am questioned. But the Kaieteur News does not make contact with me as the chief whip for the government side.
no,
Or-
that's
I'm
not
telling you the
true.
truth about anything going on about Parliament and stuff like that. And it's okay because others talk to me, so that's fine. I don't need Kaieteur News to portray what I say. But the point is that the Kaieteur News has, on a number of issues, been quite happy and content to get a selected view or a very select group of views that they trade on all the time. I have no problem with that if that's what their angle is. But they do not get, in many cases, a broad sweep. The NCN, my point is that with the NCN, we can't have our cake and eat it. We can't talk about press freedom. As I heard an important diplomat speak extensively the other night on this issue. And not at the same time recognize within the governance bodies of the press, there is an unfair hand, a tainted hand. Because all of a sudden now, the NCN doesn't qualify, the staff of GINA don't qualify, even in terms of, because the press bodies don't have to just speak for their own people. When the political parties or women's organizations speak about domestic violence and this, it's not because all of them are victims of violence they're speaking. If the Press Association sees something wrong in Guyana, it must be wrong when the Government Information Agency is denied funds for the government to specifically say what it says. The point about this distribution that you raised earlier about your stories and stuff like that, I can't answer for editorial issues, but so too you have to answer, not me, to do the editorial choices your newspaper makes. And so as we criticize your choices, you can criticize ours. The point is that the media in Guyana, you have to have government and private media. You are going to have community media stations too, little community channels, which is fine. In all of that, each play their own role. And it cannot be that out of just being being small-minded as far as I'm concerned. The opposition decides we're not giving the NCN money, or we're not giving the government, Gina, a budget. And if the newspapers of this country, media of this country, can live with that small-mindedness, then what freedom of the press do you have?
I've been
Because
given the
you're
wrap-up
being-
signals,
so
sorry.
sorry.
And so the producers are now going to be getting red because I've
Yeah, we're
gotten
going over time.
the wrap-up signal. But just to close the lid on the theme that we just raised, safety of journalists and the rule of law, I would have thought, though, that the issue of safety for journalists, like the indispensable national unity we see whenever we have a matter of national sovereignty and border integrity. Opposition and government speaks as one. The issue of safety, I would have thought, private media, government media all eat and drink and dine together in social settings. We all know that. And I would have thought that the issue of safety would be an indispensable one. And as a senior journalist, Adam, I would hope that you would try to reinforce that among colleagues. But we have to go now, and just a quick word on the last theme that we haven't touched, which says we're talking about sustainability and the integrity of journalism. In the coming year, until we celebrate or observe World Press Freedom Day next year again, what needs to happen in Guyana to strengthen the sustainability and integrity of journalism? And just very quick responses.
One word, training. When people get in, we need to train the people who come into the media. It's not a fashion parade. You come in, you stick your face on television, or you get your photograph in the newspapers. To sustain this job, you must be trained. You must know what you want to do.
And we will train them not to be writing
Not to write them
articles
myself.
like
No, you got, that's a special skill.
But quickly, looking ahead, I think Adam is right. Training, because we got a lot of young people coming into the media and they're just thrown into it and asked to go and report. No training. But I think we have to too, as journalists, and we started off with this. I think when you talk about integrity, specifically, it has to do with journalists being responsible, and I think that will come through training too. And the older journalists, the Adams and so on of this world, need to spend time, work with. It doesn't have to be a Kaieteur news journalist, right? I know personally you have given me advice on many occasions in terms of journalism, not in terms of the angle of a story.
No,
I won't take that advice.
Look, we circulate.
I think I took a risk by leaving the politician for last, but
No, that's okay. That's fine. I'm quite happy to be last. No, but I think that we've talked, and I have no dispute with you. I think that one of the things we may want to look at is at the University of Guyana Communication Program, and to make sure that in terms of the training and the capacity building of those in the media, particularly training, there was agreement with Dr. Vibe at Cambridge, had done some work with a lot of the more, technological areas. But I think the writing skills and the analytical skills and having journalists who have specializations. So you get your degree or your diploma, but you're specializing in particular areas. And the other thing, of course, the training that I think the Press Association or the media operators or somebody needs to do is the professional ethics of the profession, the ethics of the profession, which can be taught at university, but I think the Press Association needs to have its own discussions as a regulatory body, the representative of media people, and must ensure they represent everybody, and that the guys who are editing, the guys who are video, all the different, because it's not just a person writing a story, it's all the printers and a whole range of people, but really to teach about ethics. And there are many conventions and things dealing with professional ethics of journalists. And the last thing we didn't talk about, which I think in terms of sustainability is going to be a big one, and that is the social media and the impact of the social media on the written press, on publications, literature work, all sorts of things. Whether these will survive. But the problem with the social media is the major problem is unregulation, no regulation, and therefore outstanding journalists who have been writing in the media and so on are being taken over by what's called citizen journalism, and the positive and the dangers of that. And I think that maybe, although we do this once a year, I think that there should be a panel discussion, maybe at NCN or wherever, looking at the social media in the context of the sustainability of your more traditional media, and also bring in the discussions that are going on at the international level. Should one regulate the social media? Should one not? And how do journalists and media houses take the information that's coming from citizen journalists, who takes a photograph here, who sends a Twitter there? And this is a big debate going on at the international level and at the media level, because how do you can't verify some of your information, and sometimes the immediacy of reporting now, it's instantaneous. The fact that journalists generally have to check, go back and verify stories, there's no possibility of doing that with the social media.
Okay,
So
I'll
these
have to
issues-
plead.
So on
I'll
those
have to
issues,
plead
I
that
will,
we
I
leave
will
it
say I will
there.
stop. But I just wanted to say that this is an issue. I think this particular last issue, I think is a fantastic issue for a series of discussions in which media people try to move away from their categories and to look at that, because that's going to have an impact on whether these newspapers
Will survive. at all.
survive.
Oh, we have to leave it there. We've been looking at International Press Freedom Day, observed yesterday, May 3, and we're discussing the themes that UNESCO has set for the observance. Media's importance in development, safety of journalists and the rule of law, and sustainability and integrity of journalism. We've had with us Madam Gail Teixeira, Presidential Advisor on Governance, Adam Harris, Editor-in-Chief of the Kaieteur News, and Edward Layne, Editor of the NCN Newsroom. I've been your moderator, Dario McAlmon. Thank you very much for having joined us for this discussion. Look forward to your reading of all the newspapers.